All right. How to write a CAE essay. Boop. All right, let's talk about some basic things first. So the first thing is you must write an essay. In part 2 of the exam, you have a choice. It might be a report, a proposal, an informal letter, a formal letter, an email. There's 3 of those 5 types of things. Do they still do review? I don't remember. But in part 1, it's always an essay and you must write an essay. So the whole writing exam is 90 minutes and you have 2 parts and each part is the same length in terms of word count. So therefore you have about 45 minutes to write this essay. The tasks always look the same. So if you do 5 sample tasks, then when you see the 6th one, it will look the same. There will be no surprises. And don't lift too much from the actual question. When you see the question, try not to use those exact words in your writing. Sometimes it will be inevitable, like there's not many variations on those words, but sometimes there will be. So use your own words when you can. Otherwise, you just won't get any points for that particular section that you wrote. So it's a waste of time. Most of you will already know this, of course, but I have a whole website of exam tips, but they're just like general tips. It's not so specific as how to write an essay, but go and take a look. caeexamtips.com/writing. Preparing for this part of the exam. The main thing is you've got to do lots of mock exams. You have to practice this. I haven't written a CAE exam for a long time. So today, that's all I did. I just started reading my own notes, my own website about how to do it, watching my own video and other videos. And in the last hour, I just was writing introductions to essays. I have to do that because it takes a while to get back into the rhythm. So if I have to do it, you have to do it. All right? All right. Start early in your preparation. I know a lot of you like to leave everything to the last minute. You're like, oh, my exam is tomorrow. Let me Google CAE exam tips. Okay, if you're serious about the exam, you have to start writing as soon as possible. I'm talking about months before the exam because your writing is the slowest skill to improve. You could come and stay in my house for a week, and by the end of the week, you could be twice as fluent, but your writing would be maybe 2% better, right? It's a slow process. If you're doing the computer-based exam, then write on the computer. And if you're doing the paper-based one, write on paper. And word count. Everybody emails me about word count every day. If you're a little bit under, a little bit over, don't worry about it too much. Under is not so good. I think over is, it's okay, a little bit. So don't worry about it too much. But if you practice, if you write 5 essays, you'll learn, especially if you type it out and you can do a word count on Microsoft Word or whatever, you'll start to feel how long it should be. What is an essay? It might seem like a stupid question to some of you, but I think one of the problems I experienced with my students is they don't really understand the difference between an essay, a report, a proposal, and so on. So let's start with the basics. What is an essay? It's a text where you present an argument and support it with reasons. An argument, for example, here's a thesis statement that I created not long ago, so I didn't really think about it. Smartphones are bad for society. So that's my argument. That's what I believe, let's say. So if this was in the exam, I would write my introduction, and my introduction would be something like, smartphones are supposed to bring people together, but actually they push people apart. And then I would have a paragraph. How do they bring us together? Things like WhatsApp, Tinder, social media, maps, they help us connect, they help us organize, they help us meet. But on the other hand, those same things push us apart. And then I would talk about the psychological damage caused by all of the above. And then I would write a conclusion. The conclusion would basically say, although smartphones bring us together, actually they push us apart. Nice and simple. So I've got my argument that smartphones are bad for us. I've got some evidence, in this case, like different apps and what's good and bad about them. And then I conclude it all. That would be a typical essay. In the real world, essays can look like this. So the ones on the top there are today's editorials or recent editorials from the Guardian newspaper. So there's one about a new law in India. It says it's dangerous for all. So the writer has his arguments. This is why there's the new law. This is what's good about it. This is what's bad about it. In conclusion, it's bad. The second title there, The Guardian View on a Workers' Party, the Country Needs One. So I didn't read it, but I would expect, I think I could imagine what it says. We have a right-wing government. We don't have a strong left party. We need a strong left party. And here's 3, 4, 5 reasons why. The next one, longer prison terms are a knee-jerk response. So the argument there is there's no point keeping people in prison for a long time. So if I read that, I would expect to find 4 or 5 reasons why long prison terms are a bad idea, right? You get the idea. These are essays. So essays in real life. But we're not in real life, we're in the Cambridge exam. So I've just made a new page on CAE Exam Tips /blog/C1 Essay Examples. So on that page, so far there are 4, but I probably will add more example essays written by me, written by real students. So you can see what these essays look like. And of course, if you have course books or mock exam books, at the back, they normally have some example essays that you can check out. So what's different with a CAE essay to like a normal essay, or what's special, or what do you need to keep in mind? So some things, your goal is to persuade someone. We'll talk a lot more about that. It should be neutral or formal, semi-formal. So people often say to me, because I have this phrasal verbs course in which I say, oh, you can use this in the writing test. You can use that in the writing test. And they say, but my teacher told me not to use phrasal verbs in writing. That's not true. Of course you can. So this phrasal verbs course has 70 phrasal verbs. And I went through every one. I used my own opinion and I double checked on 2 different online dictionaries. And basically there are 5 or 6 from the 70 that you shouldn't use in the writing test. So the conclusion, most phrasal verbs are okay. And if you think about it, in business, a lot of phrasal verbs are used. We're going to take over that company. We're going to pay off the former CEO, and so on and so on. These are very common. So neutral, formal does not exclude phrasal verbs. But of course, you shouldn't be informal. Do not start your essay with the word "what's up?" A lot of questions about titles. The title is optional. Put the title, don't put the title. It really is not important. You are allowed to lie in your essay. You're allowed to invent things. That's not the decisive factor. Like nobody's going to fact check your essay. So for example, you could write, in a recent survey, 80% of Scottish residents said prisoners should be given kittens to take care of. Yeah, that didn't happen, but who cares? Just write whatever you want. I would recommend, so you're going to have two topics that you discuss. I recommend having one that you agree with and one that you disagree with, or one that you strongly agree with and one that you only a little bit agree with. So I think the best is one positive, one negative, because then you can use all kinds of vocabulary. On the other hand, in contrast, whereas, and so on. And before you start writing, read the task 3 times, 4 times, 1,000,000 times so that you really understand it. I've had quite a few students just start writing, hand me the essay, and then I've said, that's nice, but you didn't answer the question. And answering the question will give you 5 points. So that's the easiest 5 points you will ever get. Oh, yeah. All right, here's an example. Task, an essay task. So it says, you must answer this question, write your answers in 220 to 260 words. So your class has attended a panel discussion on facilities which should receive money from local authorities. You have made the notes below. So which facilities should receive money? Museums, sports centers, or public gardens. And then we have some opinions in this box. And at the bottom, we have the actual task now. It says, write an essay discussing 2 of the facilities in your notes. You should explain which facility it is more important for local authorities to give money to, giving reasons in support of your answer. You may, if you wish, make use of the opinions expressed in the discussion, but you should use your own words as far as possible. All right, let's try to understand this task completely. These are just questions ready-made in the book, Ready for Advanced. So you should all buy that book. I recommend that book. So who is your target reader? Let's go back to the task. It says, write an essay discussing 2 of the facilities. So normally it says, write an essay for your tutor, write an essay for your manager, something like that. Here it doesn't say, but in part 1, or where I've got the red number 1 there, it says, your class has attended a panel discussion. So who is your target reader? I think it's clear that it's your teacher. So this is going to be an academic text. How many of the listed methods do you need to write about? Where I've got the red 2, it says write an essay discussing 2 of the facilities. Writing about 3 of them is pointless and will only do harm to your score. So you write about 2 of them. What else do you have to do in your essay? So red number 3, you should explain which facility is more important and give reasons. So explaining and giving reasons. Number 4, whose opinions are quoted? Those opinions are from the panel discussion. So that means there's an audience with you, and on a stage, there's a few people, maybe 3, 4, 5 people discussing the topic. So the opinions come from those people, probably. What is the connection between the listed methods and the 3 opinions? So if we look, the first opinion says museums aren't popular with everyone, with everybody, it says, and that links with museums. Sports centers mean healthier people is about sports centers. A town needs green spaces, parks are great for everybody is about public gardens. The way I think about these opinions is some people have no imagination and they panic in the exam and they can't think of what to write. And that's why these opinions are very helpful for those people, just to give you a starting point. You can use them if you want. I never do, because I don't have a problem thinking about what's good and bad about museums. But if you're in a panic in the exam, of course you can use them, but you don't have to. Number 7, what do you need to persuade the target reader about? Number 7 is explaining which facility it is more important to give money to. So persuade. You are not a salesman. You are not trying to get somebody to buy your product. But you should gently guide people towards the conclusion that you believe in. So, for example, if you think the money should go to museums, you could say, oh, it's nice giving money to sports centers, but museums are the future. Museums are where education meets history, blah, 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 whatever. So you're guiding someone to a logical conclusion that you happen to agree with. That's persuade. That's what that means. Okay. Planning. My students hate planning. They don't want to do it. And the first thing I do when I sit down to do an essay is I plan it. If you just start typing, it can't, I don't think it can be good. You have to plan it, especially for you as a not native speaker. You should spend 5 minutes planning. Don't worry that you have, oh, I've only got 40 minutes left. If you just write for 20 minutes, you will write 200 words, I'm sure. So it's not about how many words per minute, right? It's about the quality of those words. Where are you going to use inversions, conditionals, phrasal verbs, all those advanced things that you need to use to get a high score? And here you can also start to think about what reasons will you give. It asks for reasons. So where should we give the money and why? You have to think about that. And if you do that in the planning stage, you won't forget to do it. And then this is, I covered most of this in my other video that I made, but this is, I didn't do this one. How can you keep the reader interested? So if you start with a strong opening, great, I want to read it then. But also through the text, these essays can get a little bit boring, and that's not your fault. That's just, sometimes essays are boring, right? Spending money on a museum or a sports center. Yeah, it's not the most interesting topic. So you could just put in some surprises. For example, if you say, many people think that museums are boring. However, in a recent study, 50% of young people said museums were the most fun they had. I don't know, like say something the opposite of what people believe to be true. Try and surprise me somehow. That's one way to keep it interesting. So I've written 3 or 4 introductions to this, this topic. So which facilities should receive money from local authorities? Okay, here's one. I call it the question opening. So start with a question and then answer the question. It's good, right? Is it better to have a healthy population or clean air? I think that's a good opening, to be honest. I just wrote it an hour ago, but I'm quite happy with that. I think it's quite provocative. Yeah. So, is it better to have a healthy population or clean air? That is the tough question facing our local authority. A recent panel on the issue of whether sports centres or public gardens should receive funding couldn't reach a consensus. However, I believe there is an obvious solution. All right, 2 things I want to say. I mentioned the panel. I don't always mention those people in my essays, but maybe it's a good idea. Maybe I should start to do that more, because it is It's part of the task, right? It mentions it. You don't have to. Maybe it's a good idea. Just mention that you remember there was a panel. Now, the last line, however, I believe there is an obvious solution. I often write in this style. I think it's maybe too informal for these academic essays. Yeah, it's difficult. It's a difficult one. So anyway, if you don't want to use the word I, you don't want to make it about you. Okay, I think that's safe. It's very safe to think like that. And maybe I'm too informal with these things. So therefore, you might change it to, however, it should be possible to find a solution, something neutral, something safe. That's probably a better way to go. The next type of intro is the quotation. So you start with something that a famous person said and use that as your starting point. When Theresa May said, "There is no magic money tree here," she could have been talking about my hometown. Nevertheless, there is some money in the budget to invest in one facility, and the shortlist seems to be either sports centres or public gardens. All right. It's not amazing, but you have to start, and if you don't start, you won't finish. So, it's fine. Then this one, Aristotle once said, "Museums strengthen the mind, sports centres strengthen the body. Our local authority has a hard choice to invest in one or the other. Both are worthy, but it is my belief that there is a clear choice." And again, I've written my belief, so be careful with that kind of thing. Now, you could Google this phrase and you won't find it. Aristotle didn't say that. And I don't think they had sports centers in ancient Athens. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the perfect introduction to this task. And I'm going to write it and nobody's going to check. They don't care. It's good. I don't know. I thought it was funny. Another kind of introduction is using facts and or statistics. So you might say something like, 60% of our local population are clinically obese. This shocking statistic was the starting point for recent discussions about whether the council should invest in sports centres or public gardens. Which one would have the greatest impact on the obesity epidemic? That's pretty good. That's a pretty good intro. Ending with a question as well, and that's a nice flow into the next paragraph, which could be something like the first choice or the first option or something like that. Essays have conventions, things that you expect to read in them. So you can learn some set phrases like these. It is probably true to say that, ... For example, it is probably true to say that parks are used more by the elderly than the young, and so on. There can be no doubt that. It is generally believed that. There are those who argue that. Opponents of road building argue that more roads means more traffic. All the evidence suggests that, and studies have shown that. Studies have shown that people who use smartphones walk into lampposts 5 times more often than those who don't. Again, I just made it up, but it feels true. That's probably true. More conventions of an essay. So this is a great place for your advanced grammar, your passives, conditionals, your modal verbs. Some examples. The government could invest, that's an active sentence with a modal. More roads could be built, passive, modal. If we act now, we can save money later on, conditional with an active modal. If action were taken now, a lot of money could be saved in the future, conditional, passive, modal. So if you read a lot of these type of Cambridge essays, you'll find it's all modals. There's a lot of passive. And just by like copying the models, you will end up writing like this. All right, after you've finished writing it, then you should check what you have written. Check everything, check that you did the tasks. So the task was write about 2 of the points, give your reasons, and say which one is the most important. Did you do that? Yes. Did you do that? Yes. Did you do that? Yes. Really check that, because that's the easiest points in this part of the exam. Check for obvious mistakes, of course. Check for missing words. Sometimes when you rewrite a sentence, you miss out a keyword or a little word. Don't stress about the word count in the exam because you've already practiced so much. You should have a feel for how many words that you've used. And then if you have some spare time, can you punch up the essay? So punch up means make it better. So for example, you read it and you see the word very important. This is very important. Well, you could change that to vital. This is vital for our local economy. That kind of thing is something that's a good use of your time at the end of the exam.